Welcome back to Marxist Saw. Let's continue reading Lenin's 1904 book One Step Forward, Two Steps Back, The Crisis in Our Party. Discussion on centralism prior to the split among the Iskra-ists. Before passing to the really interesting question of the formulation of paragraph 1 of the rules, a question which undoubtedly disclosed the existence of different shades of opinion, let us dwell a little on that brief general discussion of the rules which occupied the 14th and part of the 15th Congress sittings. This discussion is of some significance inasmuch as it preceded the complete divergence within the Iskra organization over the composition of the central bodies, whereas the subsequent debate on the rules in general, and on co-optation in particular, took place after this divergence in the Iskra organization. Naturally, before the divergence we were able to express our views more impartially, in the sense that they were more independent of views about the personal composition of the Central Committee, which became such a keen issue with us all. Comrade Martov, as I have already remarked, associated himself, page 157, with my views on organization, only making the reservation that he differed on 2 points of detail. Both the anti-Iskra-ists and the center, on the contrary, at once took the field against both fundamental ideas of the whole Iskra organizational plan, and, consequently, against the rules in their entirety, against centralism and against two centers. Comrade Lieber referred to my rules as organized distrust and discerned decentralism in the proposal for two centers, as did Comrades Popov and Igorov. Comrade Akimov wanted to broaden the jurisdiction of the local committees, and, in particular, to grant them themselves the right to alter their composition. They should be allowed greater freedom of action. The local committees should be elected by the active workers in their localities, just as the Central Committee is elected by the representatives of all the active organizations in Russia. And if even this cannot be allowed, let the number of members that the Central Committee may appoint to local committees be limited. Page 158. Comrade Akimov, as you see, suggested an argument against hypertrophy of centralism, but Comrade Martov remained deaf to these weighty arguments, not yet having been induced by his defeat over the composition of the central bodies to follow in Akimov's wake. He remained deaf even when Comrade Akimov suggested to him the idea of his own rules, paragraph 7, restriction of the Central Committee's right to appoint members to the committees. At that time Comrade Martov still did not want any dissonance with us, and for that reason tolerated a dissonance both with Comrade Akimov and with himself. At that time, the only opponents of monstrous centralism were those to whom Iskra's centralism was clearly disadvantageous. It was opposed by Akimov, Lieber, and Goldblatt, followed, cautiously and circumspectly, so that they could always turn back, by Igorov, see pages 156 and 276, and such like. At that time it was still clear to the vast majority of the party that it was the parochial, circle interests of the Bund, Yuzhny Rabiki, etc., that evoked the protest against centralism. For that matter, now too it is clear to the majority of the party that it is the circle interests of the old Iskra editorial board that cause it to protest against centralism. Take, for example, Comrade Goldblatt's speech, pages 160 to 61. He inveighs against my monstrous centralism and claims that it would lead to the destruction of the lower organizations, that it is permeated through and through with the desire to give the center unrestricted powers and the unrestricted right to interfere in everything, that it allows the organizations only one right, to submit without a murmur to orders from above, etc. The center proposed by the draft would find itself in a vacuum. It would have no peripheral organizations around it, but only an amorphous mass in which its executive agents would move. Why, this is exactly the kind of false phrasemongering to which the Martovs and Axelrods proceeded to treat us after their defeat at the Congress. The Bund was laughed at when it fought our centralism while granting its own central body even more definite unrestricted rights, e.g., to appoint and expel members, and even to refuse to admit delegates to Congresses. And when people sort things out, the howls of the minority will also be laughed at, for they cried out against centralism and against the rules when they were in the minority, but lost no time in taking advantage of the rules once they had managed to make themselves the majority. Over the question of two centers, the grouping was also clearly evident. All the Iskra-ists were opposed by Lieber, by Akhimov, the first to strike up the now favorite Axelrod Martov tune about the central organ predominating over the Central Committee on the Council, by Popov, and by Igorov. From the ideas of organization which the old Iskra had always advocated, and which the Popovs and Igorovs had verbally approved, the plan for two centers followed of itself. The policy of the old Iskra cut across the plans of Yezhny Rabaki, the plans to create a parallel popular organ and to convert it virtually into the dominant organ. There lies the root of the paradox, so strange at first glance, that all the anti-Iskra-ists and the entire Marsh were in favor of one central body, that is, of seemingly greater centralism. Of course, there were some delegates, especially among the Marsh, who probably did not have a clear idea where the organizational plans of Yezhny Rabaki would lead, and were bound to lead in the nature of things. But they were impelled to follow the anti-Iskra-ists by their very irresoluteness and unsureness of themselves. Of the speeches by Iskra-ists during this debate on the rules, the one preceding the split among the Iskra-ists, particularly noteworthy were those of comrades Martov, association with my ideas of organization, and Trotsky. Every word of the answer the latter gave comrades Akhimov and Lieber exposes the utter falsity of the minority's post-Congress conduct and theories. The rules, he, Comrade Akhimov, said, do not define the jurisdiction of the Central Committee with enough precision. I cannot agree with him. On the contrary, this definition is precise and means that inasmuch as the party is one whole, it must be ensured control over the local committees. Comrade Lieber said, borrowing my expression, that the rules were organized distrust. That is true. But I used this expression in reference to the rules proposed by the Bund spokesman, which represented organized distrust on the part of a section of the party towards the whole party. Our rules, on the other hand, at that time, before the defeat over the composition of the central bodies, the rules were ours, represent the organized distrust of the party towards all its sections, that is, control over all local, district, national, and other organizations, page 158. Yes, our rules are here correctly described, and we would advise those to bear this more constantly in mind who are now assuring us with an easy conscience that it was the intriguing majority who conceived and introduced the system of organized distrust or, which is the same thing, the state of siege. One has only to compare this speech with the speeches at the Congress of the League Abroad to get a specimen of political spinelessness. A specimen of how the views of Martov and company changed depending on whether the matter concerned their own group of a lower order or someone else's. Thank you for tuning in. If you thought this was helpful, please follow Marxist Saw on YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter for more texts like this one.